Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. I am Scott. I am ranking all 115 Stephen King short stories, all that are completed and published. These are stories 5 through 1. Let's go ahead and get started. If you've been keeping track, you will know that all the stories that are in the top 5 come from two collections, Night Shift and Skeleton Crew. Two collections that I wouldn't really say are my favorite collections, but they definitely make up a lot of the top 10. I think there's only one short story in the top 10 that doesn't come from either of these collections. Let's go ahead and get started. Short story number 5 is from Night Shift. It is Quitters Inc. Unlike many stories in Night Shift, it actually hadn't been previously published. Night Shift, it's the first publication of it. A man is trying to stop smoking. This is in 1970s, so it's a little bit different than now. And he basically signs up with a company that makes him pay a lot of money to make him stop smoking. And the thing about this company is they go to extreme ends to make this happen. There's nothing they will not do to stop him from smoking. It's also been part of a movie. I think it was in Cat's Eye, which had I think it was James Wood as the main character in it. Chess, and also of course at this time King was a fairly heavy smoker, although smoking was perhaps the least of his addictions at the time. But some of the best work that King does is a reflection of what's going on in his life. Much like Jack Torrance in The Shining, alcoholic King is. Uh, some of his work in the 80s was a reflection of the drug addictions that he was going through. A lot of the work he's doing now, as I talked about before, is a reflection on old age and mortality. And King, being someone in his 70s, is kind of closer to his end of life than he is to the beginning. So uh, obviously, he was probably trying to stop smoking at the time. And yeah, Chess, the things that this company would do to make sure he would stop, very sadistic, but they did tell him. Uh, Number 4 is in Skeleton Crew, originally published in Gallery. It is The Monkey. The monkey, basically one of those little novelty clanging monkeys. And this is pretty much an homage to the monkey's paw. I don't remember the person's name who wrote that, something Jacobs, I believe. But basically, a be careful what you wish for type of story. I mentioned before, particularly with on Slide In Road, and there's another one that I'm blanking on at the moment, but the stories that King writes that are an homage uh, generally, to me, don't hold up as well. But this one, I think it does. Also, because I am very sure that I read The Monkey before I read The Monkey's Paw. I knew about the story The Monkey's Paw, but I hadn't read it. And also, The Monkey's Paw, quite honestly, is a very simple story that I think, much like a cover of a song, sometimes the cover is better than the original, and I think that's the case here. Number 3, also in Skeleton Crew, originally published in Red Book, which I believe is a woman's magazine. I'm not sure, but it's interesting uh, because a woman is a very important character in the story, even though she's not the main character, and uh, she, she is probably one of the best examples of King writing a woman, very important to the story, but the character herself is not the best characterization. But that works for this story because the story doesn't need her to be necessarily a fully fleshed flaws and dimensions type of character. But the narrator is somebody named David who's talking to his friend Homer, who talks about Mrs. Todd, the wife of one of the summer people. And Homer, he's a much older man, uh, but he and Mrs. Todd kind of develop a friendship, and she's always taking him on drives because she tries to find shortcuts. This is in the 80s before we have uh, GPS, and back when well, I was a kid in the 80s, but in the 90s I used to be able to drive places without having to put it into my phone, and now I can't do that anymore. But so she's always trying to find shortcuts and find even shorter and shorter ways around, and sometimes ends up going to places that pretty much almost seem supernatural, eerie, uh, and I just, even though it's Homer talking to the sky, Homer and Mrs. Todd, their relationship is just really interesting. There's something maybe supernatural about Mrs. Todd. You can definitely take that. I think it's just a beautifully written story. Is there something between Homer and Mrs. Todd? Eh, not on the paper that you see, but there's definitely a connection. And I really just enjoyed the story. Number two, and I think the best story from Skeleton Crew is The Jaunt. It was originally published in Twilight Zone magazine. It's a science fiction story in much the same way a lot of Ray Bradbury short stories are science fiction. It's like the science fiction is just kind of like a cover for what's going on, and really this is a horror story, very much so. Man and his family are jaunting, which is like kind of this travel system to take you like to planets and stuff, and it's quite the experience. They're going to Mars, and one of his sons is very inquisitive, and he wants to know what the process of jaunting, what has everything that has to do with it. He's determined to find out, and that's where the horror comes in. I honestly will tell you that until the end of the story, you get to the end of the story, I don't think this is a top 10 story, but the end of the story makes everything that happens before it's building up to this end, and that's why it the ending of the story probably sticks to me more than almost any Stephen King ending that I can think of. The story itself maybe doesn't, but the ending definitely does. And that ending has such an impact that it made this my number two story. My number one story is probably not going to be everybody's number one story. I perfectly fine with that. But it is in Night Shift. It is the last rung on the ladder, previously unpublished before it was published in Night Shift. It's about a man and his sister when they're younger. They're climbing up a ladder in the barn, and the ladder breaks when the girl is climbing on it, and what they do after. And then the story, basically, what happened there reflects on what happens to them later in life. There's, as John D. McDonald talks about in the forward to this, there's no supernatural element to this story. It's a story about family. It's a story about uh, regret and, kind of parting from your family. It's a beautiful and tragic, sad story. It to me is the best of what Stephen King has to offer when it comes to his short stories. And I love this story. That is all 115 stories, starting with Man with a Belly, the very worst, to the last rung on the ladder, the very best. For now, if you know me, I will change my mind, but definitely the last rung on the ladder, probably going to continue to be my number one. Uh, Please like and subscribe, leave a comment, and I will talk to you next time.